Welcome to lesson 1 of this course. In this lesson, we'll talk about tensors, their use, and how to do some operations on them. First, we need to download Pytorch. To download Pytorch, go to pytorch.org and choose your download options. If you have a CUDA GPU, then you can download Pytorch for the CUDA version that you have. If you don't know what this is, don't worry about it. In this course, we'll use Colab, which allows us to execute Python code on the cloud in Jupyter Notebooks. You'll find these notebooks in the Google Drive link below. Let's go to Colab. Now we're on Colab. Let's talk about what a tensor is. A tensor is a multidimensional matrix containing elements of the same data type. We use it to store the data that we train the model on and test it on. A cool thing about Pytorch tensors is that we can do operations on Pytorch tensors very quickly compared to Python lists. So let's learn how to create a tensor. So to create a tensor, first we need, of course, to import Pytorch, and we type import torch. This is how we import the library. Then we get the data. In this case, it's a Python list. So to change a Python list to a Pytorch tensor, we call the tensor function from the Pytorch library, and we give it the list. Now data is a Pytorch tensor. We can also convert NumPy arrays to tensors. First, we'll import NumPy as MP. Then we'll create a random NumPy array. Then we would like to convert this NumPy array into a Pytorch tensor and store that in the variable data. So we call the same function tensor and give it the NumPy array. And now we have a tensor from the original NumPy array. Sometimes we'd like to create tensors with specific values. To do that, we can call torch.zeros and give it some numbers. These numbers, the number of numbers here is the number of dimensions that we have for the tensor, and the number means how big the dimension is. So we call torch.zeros and we give it 2 and 3. And this will give us a tensor that has 3 columns and 2 rows. We can call torch.ones. The numbers here work exactly the same as here. So the number of numbers here is how many dimensions we want to have. And we call torch.ones, and now we have a tensor full of ones. And if we want to create a tensor with random values, we could call torch.rand. We call the rand function from the Pytorch library. And this is how the tensor looks like. There are some operations that we can do on tensors. We could count the number of elements in these tensors, and we use the function numel and give it the tensor, and it counts how many elements are in the tensor, and in this case there are 8. And we can transpose a tensor by swapping the dimensions given. So we give it the tensor, the dimensions that we want to swap, and it swaps the dimensions. And we could also add dimensions to tensors, giving them the position that we want to add that dimension in. So now we have an additional dimension. One cool thing about Pytorch is that we can index into tensors using the same Python notation. So now we can index into the tensor data by putting the number that we like, the number of elements that we like, in each square bracket, and we will receive the element that we need. There are data types in Pytorch, and you need to take care of this because you might need to change this in your tensors. So we call the function that we like, and we use the dtype attribute for the data type, and we give it the data type that we'd like. In this case, we want the data type double. So now the elements have a 64 floating point data type. And this is how the tensor looks like, and we've modified the dtype attribute. So that's it for this lesson. We were able to create tensors, do some operations on them, index into them, and change their data type. See you in the next lesson.